Standing in the Shadow of Truth. Chapter 1. Whispers of Dusk. Dusk enveloped the gorge of Statue Square, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Briar Ingram stood before the towering statue, its cold stone eyes fixed on her, a silent witness to her turmoil. A restless sea of faces filled the square, murmurs rising like an impending storm. The weight of her brother's fading health pressed on Briar, each tick of an imagined clock reminding her of the days slipping away. If she didn't voice the truth about this statue, a symbol of oppression by the end of the week, the consequences would ripple through her life irreparably, sealing her fate and that of her ailing brother. Fear coiled tight around her heart, tightening with every breath. Could she confront the very people she called family? The tension crackled in the air as the crowd debated, voices rising and falling like waves crashing against the cliffs. "But what if they turn on you, Briar? You can't just stand there and risk it all." Jenna's voice sliced through the noise, her eyes wide with concern. Briar hesitated, the gravity of her decision weighing heavily on her. Did she truly want to sacrifice her place in this community for the sake of a statue? Silence felt like a betrayal, yet so did speaking out. She needed to choose, but the stakes were high. What if her silence perpetuated the oppression? The statue loomed large, its surface glistening with the last rays of sunlight, stark against the gathering shadows of doubt in Briar's mind. She took a step forward, her legs feeling as though they were anchored to the ground. The whispers grew louder, laced with accusations and fear. "You know what happened to those who spoke out before?" Memories of past repercussions crashed over her, sending a chill through her. Briar drew in a sharp breath, her chest tightening as panic surged. Time slipped through her fingers just like her brother's strength, and the thought of him never receiving the medicine he needed sent a wave of guilt crashing over her. With a deep breath, Briar steadied herself, forcing the words to surface. "Listen closely, my friends. This statue stands as a testament to the fears that entwine us, a silent monument to the shackles of our silence. We must reclaim our voices and speak the truth." The crowd fell momentarily silent, the weight of her declaration hanging in the air. Soon murmurs returned, skepticism creeping back in. "You'll bring ruin upon our community," someone shouted. How could she change their minds when her own was so conflicted? Yet deep down she felt an urgency. If she didn't act now, her brother would suffer the consequences, and the community would remain shackled by fear. Briar's pulse raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on her, an urge to flee battling against her resolve to stay. We cannot allow the specter of fear to guide our future. She locked eyes with Jenna, who looked torn between loyalty and fear. Dusk settled over the gorge of Statue Square, casting elongated shadows across the crowd, gathered in tense anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the lingering smoke from torches, creating a charged atmosphere ripe for confrontation. As murmurs of debate faded into a shocked silence, Briar Ingram stood at the forefront, rooted in place, her heart thundering against her ribcage. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in fury, their accusations of betrayal and treason hanging in the air, palpable like the weight of the statues looming above. Around her, supporters of the statue fidgeted, their faces a mixture of anger and confusion. Jenna's eyes flickered towards Briar, a silent question shimmering beneath the surface, urging her to act. This was her moment. She couldn't flee. Not now, not when the truth was within her grasp. The statue loomed ahead, a titan carved from dark stone, its unyielding gaze a reminder of the oppression it symbolized. Briar's palms dampened against her sides, and her fingers quivered as she considered the act of defiance. A chorus of murmurs rose, voices intertwining in a tapestry of dissent and allegiance. Briar's hands trembled slightly as doubt clouded her mind. What if they turned on her? What if she alone saw the truth behind this monument of oppression? The figure's accusations echoed in her mind, the threat of backlash whispering at her heels, coiling around her thoughts. Briar scanned the crowd, some glaring at her, their expressions hard as stone, while others watched with a glimmer of hope. The thought of remaining silent twisted her stomach in anxiety. Their glances weighed heavily on her, a reminder she wasn't alone. Yet the risk of standing up felt precarious. She envisioned the fallout, friends turning away, whispers of betrayal trailing in her wake. But what good was silence in the face of oppression? Briar locked eyes with Jenna again, finding strength in her friend's gaze. Hope flickered there, urging her forward. Fear should not be our compass, guiding us into the shadows.
The words surged up, raw and urgent. She stepped closer to the statue, every heartbeat a drum against the chaos surrounding them. The crowd shifted, anticipation crackling in the air. Yes, they might turn against her, but she had to act. Her voice trembled, defiance woven through her fear. Briar inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth grounding her, pulling her back to the moment. She lifted her chin, meeting the eyes of the crowd, feeling the weight of their expectations settle upon her shoulders like a cloak. The statue, once a symbol of oppression, now felt like a barrier she could break.
Dusk cloaked the statue's marsh gorge in a shroud of shadows, the last glimmers of sunlight swallowed by the encroaching night. Briar Ingram stood at the gorge's edge, her pulse quickening, breaths coming in sharp bursts. The judgment of her community weighed heavier than the damp air around her. Having spoken out against the statue, a monument to oppression, a new fear gripped her. Without decisive action, she risked losing everything. Time was slipping away. If she couldn't secure the medicine for her loved one before the week ended, the consequences would be dire, and isolation from her community would feel like a death sentence. Briar turned away from the square, the cacophony of dissent and agreement swirling in her mind like a tempest. Each step felt like wading through mud, the ground beneath her uncertain. She stumbled into a secluded area by the gorge where the water crashed against the rocks, mirroring her inner turmoil. Staring into the darkening waters, she struggled to recognize the girl who had dared to challenge the statue. Doubts clawed at her. Had she ignited a spark of change, or merely painted a target on her back? Crouched by the gorge, Briar's hands shook, the adrenaline from her speech fading into a cold sweat. The silence of her community echoed louder than the rushing water, a stark reminder of their collective fear. Continuing down this path could lead to ostracism. Panic surged within her, urging her to retreat and hide from a world that felt hostile. But the thought of her loved one's fate ignited a new urgency. She had to act, and she had to do it soon. A rustling behind her jolted Briar from her thoughts. She turned, heart pounding, to see Rowan stepping out from the trees, their eyes wide with concern. "You really shouldn't have said that. They're not ready for this, and you could lose everything." Their words struck Briar like a lightning bolt, amplifying her fears. "I can't just back down now. It's too risky, but I have to keep moving forward." "Will you come with me?" she replied, her voice trembling with resolve. Rowan took a step closer, urgency threading through their voice. "What if you lose your place with us? What if your loved one doesn't get the medicine in time? You'll be left with nothing." Each word felt like a countdown, and Briar's mind spun. The week hung over her like a guillotine, poised to drop if she didn't find a way to save her loved one. She stood at the edge of the gorge, caught between the crashing water and the whispers of doubt filling her mind. Whatever she chose would come with backlash, but the thought of losing everything, her voice, her loved one, sent a jolt of determination through her. With a deep breath, she turned to Rowan, her resolve hardening. Shadows deepened around them, the weight of her decision pressing forward. Would they stand by her now, or would she face the darkness alone? Briar squared her shoulders, the weight of her decision pressing against her sternum like the stone of the statue looming above. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the jagged horizon, shadows stretched across the gorge of Statues Square, swallowing the flickering torches and the murmurs of the crowd. The scent of damp earth clung to her skin, mingling with the acrid smoke curling from the flames. This was it. No turning back. Rowan's gaze lingered on her, a silent plea for courage. The clock ticked steadily, each second a reminder of what was at stake. Briar inhaled deeply, preparing to speak out. The image of her loved one in danger hardened her resolve, igniting a fierce determination within her. The murmurs rose and fell like a restless sea of uncertainty. Her fingers twitched at her sides, itching to grasp the fabric of her tunic. She stepped forward, the rough cobblestones biting at her feet, and felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. A tightness coiled in her throat as the statue towered over her, its stone face a mask of indifference. But she wouldn't let fear suffocate her. Not now, not when hope flickered like a candle in the wind. Taking a steadying breath, she lifted her chin. Silence hummed in the air, electric and heavy, waiting for her next move. "Listen." Her voice cracked, raw and unpolished, yet it sliced through the murmurs, capturing the crowd's attention. They stilled, their breath collectively held. Briar's heart raced, but she pressed on, her words spilling out in a rush. "This statue shouldn't control our fate any longer. Look around. The fears it embodies are choking us. We have the power to change that."
Each phrase ignited a spark within her, pushing her past the trembling uncertainty. Why did it feel like a declaration of war? The crowd shifted. Some exchanged furtive glances, while others leaned in, drawn by the fervor in her voice. Briar drank in their reactions, each flicker of interest, fueling her resolve. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The statue's cold gaze bore down on her, but she refused to shrink away. The clock was still ticking, yet she found her voice amidst the chaos. "Break free from your fears," she urged, arms extending outward like branches reaching for the sun. "We can change this together. We can fight against the darkness that looms over us." The air crackled, charged with the weight of her words. In that moment, she was no longer just Briar Ingram. She was the embodiment of their collective struggle, a spark illuminating the gloom of despair. Would they follow her into the light? The murmurs transformed into a chorus, their collective voices rising in harmony with her sentiment. Briar's breath caught as she took in their faces, some hardened by.
As dusk painted the skyline in shades of crimson, Briar Ingram stood at the edge of the gorge of Statues Square, her pulse quickened at the thought of the impending confrontation. The towering statue behind her loomed like a sentinel of oppression, its granite features etched with centuries of conflict. Tonight she had to rally her community. The deadline weighed upon her like a brewing storm. If she failed to ignite their passion, to reclaim their voice by the week's end, the consequences for her loved one would be dire. This was her moment to spark change, and she was determined not to let fear extinguish her resolve. Briar stepped forward. Her voice trembled, yet remained resolute. "This statue embodies the chains that bind our voices, the shackles of silence that stifle our cries." She scanned the crowd, desperate for a glimmer of support, but was met with harsh laughter. A group of staunch supporters surged forward, their faces twisted in scorn. "You think you can just tear down what we hold sacred?" One shouted, his voice laced with venom. The air thickened with hostility, each insult a dagger aimed at her resolve. Briar's heart raced as time slipped away. The medicine would be gone in 3 days, and her loved one would pay the price for her inaction. No time to falter now. "We must reclaim our voices, ensure our cries are heard above the clamor of oppression," she shouted. But the crowd only grew louder, their shouts crashing over her like waves against the shore. As tension escalated, Briar's breath became shallow. A wave of isolation washed over her. The weight of their anger pressed upon her like a crushing tide. "You dare to label me a traitor? I stand for the voiceless." Another voice pierced the chaos, sending a chill through her. Panic clawed at her throat. 3 days. 3 days until her loved one would suffer the consequences of her inaction. She straightened her back, steeling herself, yet doubt gnawed at her insides. What if this was all for nothing? What if her truth only led to more pain? "We don't need your kind here," a woman screamed, her face a mask of fury. The crowd surged, pushing Briar back as they shouted, drowning her pleas in a tide of hostility. She swayed, feeling the ground shift beneath her. Each taunt felt like a punch, each accusation a reminder of the stakes she faced. She had to make them see, but the fear of backlash clawed at her thoughts. The shadows around her whispered warnings of what could follow if she persisted. Retreat was tempting, yet the weight of her truth pressed on her chest. Time was slipping away, and she felt her chance to save them slipping away. With a final glance at the statue that embodied everything she fought against, Briar turned and fled into the shadows, her heart pounding. The crowd's voices faded behind her, but the fear and despair clung to her like a shroud. Isolation crept in, reminding. Chapter 2: Veil of Shadows. As dusk draped its velvet cloak over the gorge of Statues Square, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint smoke from flickering torches. Towering statues loomed above, casting elongated shadows that danced across the uneven cobblestones where restless feet shuffled in anxious anticipation. Murmurs of debate clashed against the stone archway inscribed with "Freedom through Understanding," resonating like a heartbeat amidst the growing tension. The cool stone grazed Briar's fingertips as she leaned against the cracked pedestal, the roughness anchoring her in the moment. Yet a heavy thud resonated in her chest, desperate for release. Briar pushed herself to speak, the coolness of the stone beneath her palm contrasting with the warmth radiating from the nearby torches. "This statue reflects our journey, holding both our shadows and our brilliance," she implored, her voice rising above the tumult. Faces around her twisted in anger and confusion, the air thick with sweat and smoke. Her words tumbled into the charged atmosphere like stones dropped into a still pond, creating ripples of dissent. Distant shouts crescendoed, each one a stark reminder that the community she cherished was fracturing.
Their collective gaze bore down on her as oppressive as the looming shadows of the statues. To erase it is to erase our very souls. Then a strangled scream pierced the air, catching Briar off guard. The crowd parted like water around a stone, revealing a figure crumpled on the cobblestones. Her breath caught as she recognized the familiar shape, their pale face illuminated by flickering torchlight, sending a chill racing through her. A wave of clamoring voices surged, confusion and fear mixing into chaos that drowned out the arguments she had fought so hard to make. Everything around her spun out of control as she rushed forward, the cool cobblestones blurring beneath her feet. The scent of earth and stone morphed into something acrid, a metallic tang that clung to her throat as she knelt beside them. "No, no, stay with me, please," she whispered, gripping their hand as her breath quickened. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, the tension twisting in her chest, each tick of the clock echoing in her ears, a reminder of what was at stake. The crowd swirled around her, voices rising in a frantic crescendo as Briar's heart thundered in her ears. The statue behind her loomed larger than ever, a silent witness to the chaos unfolding. With a choked breath she fought against the tide of despair, the coolness of the stone pedestal grounding her resolve. She had to rally them, to remind them of their shared history, to fight not just for the statue but for the fragile life that lay before her, flickering like a candle in the wind. As shadows stretched and deepened, she teetered on the edge of hope and dread, the outcome hanging in the balance like the fading sunlight. In that charged moment, Briar's voice rose above the clamor, a beacon piercing through the darkness.
Morning light poured through the towering statues in the gorge of Statue Square, casting long shadows that danced over the crowd gathered for the rally. Briar Ingram knelt beside her sister Leela, who lay motionless on the cobblestones, a fragile breath escaping her lips. Briar's heart raced, matching the urgency of the moment. Just 3 days remained, 3 days until the medicine could mean the difference between life and a void that would swallow her sister whole. The community's voices, once a rallying cry, faded into a dull murmur, drowned out by the pounding in her chest. Leela needed help, and as Briar's gaze darted from her sister to the throng of impassioned activists, the gravity of her choice pressed down on her: save her sister or advocate for the cause. Both paths twisted into darkness, and time slipped through her fingers like sand. Briar's fingers trembled as she brushed Leela's hair from her face, despair clawing at her with each passing second. The crowd roared, voices rising and falling like waves, demanding action against the oppressive regime. "We cannot let this moment slip away," someone shouted, igniting a fresh wave of fervor. But all Briar could focus on was the hollow echo of Leela's breaths, the urgency of her sister's condition gnawing at her thoughts. She should be with her, securing the medicine, but every moment spent away from the rally felt like a betrayal. The relentless ticking of the clock echoed in her mind, a reminder that with each tick, Leela slipped further from her grasp. Briar's heart thudded in her chest, mirroring the chaos around her. "We need to make a stand," a voice cried out, igniting cheers from the crowd. They wanted her to lead, to remind them of their shared struggle. But how could she lead when her sister lay dying? Guilt sliced through her, a dagger of self-loathing. Leela's labored breaths punctuated the air like a countdown. If she didn't act soon, if she didn't find a way to help her sister, the consequences would be irreversible. The community would need her, but at what cost? Briar's gaze darted between Leela's pale face and the rising tide of emotions in the crowd. "Fear must not dictate our fate," she shouted, but the words felt hollow. As the rally intensified, the pressure crushed her. If she left now, would the community see her as a coward, or would they understand her anguish? Each choice threatened to sever the very fabric of her existence, leaving her vulnerable in a world that thrived on unity. Yet with every second that passed, Leela's life hung in the balance, stakes climbing beyond her wildest fears. With a final glance at her sister, Briar's mind raced. Decisions loomed like shadows, each path paved with uncertainty. As dusk settled over Statue's Marsh Gorge, the air crackled with tension. Briar Ingram stood at the edge of the throng, her heart thudded against her ribs. The deadline loomed. If she didn't find the medicine for her sister, it would be too late. A week was all she had, and whispers of a hidden cache of supplies flickered like an unlit match in the chaos. Voices rose and fell around her, a cacophony of conflict, threatening to drown out the hope she clung to. This was her moment to act, to slip away from the crowd and secure the medicine, but the debate spiraled, pulling everyone's attention away from her desperate search.
Briar's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for the source of the rumors she'd overheard. A voice cut through the din, sharp and urgent. "They've got a stash hidden near the old fountain." The words ignited a spark of hope in her chest, but the uproar around the statue intensified. Opponents clashed, shouting accusations and threats. Their anger bore down on Briar, a crushing weight. No one noticed her, yet she had to move quickly. Time was running out. She took a breath, steeling herself, but a knot of urgency twisted in her gut, muddling her thoughts. Could she risk leaving her sister alone for a few moments? As the debate reached a fever pitch, Briar edged closer to the commotion, straining to hear more about the stash. Sweat trickled down her back. The crowd's energy pulsed, mirroring the frantic beats of her heart. The shouting grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. Every shout felt like a countdown, a reminder of how little time remained. "We don't have time for this," someone yelled, and she flinched, the urgency wrapping around her like a vice. Suddenly, a loud shout from the front of the stage pierced through the chaos. "Look, it's the enforcers!" Panic rippled through the crowd, shifting their attention. Briar felt a jolt of fear. The moment she'd been waiting for was slipping away as everyone turned toward the new threat. She had to act now or risk losing everything. The noise enveloped her, and she clenched her fists, knowing she had to push through the chaos before it was too late. Just as she gathered her resolve to slip away, the crowd surged, dragging her along. Breath escaped her as their collective fear tightened around her throat. The enforcers wouldn't wait. They would come for them all. She had to get to the fountain, to the medicine, and quickly. But as the shouts grew louder, Briar hesitated. Would she be swept away or break free?
The gorge of Statue Square loomed under a midday sun. The uneven cobblestones cool against my feet, each step weighing heavily with my choice. Towering statues stood like silent sentinels, their dark forms casting long shadows that stretched across the square, seemingly judging my every move. The air was thick with heated whispers, mingling with the scent of damp earth and a bitter tang from the torches burning nearby. Above, weathered canopies fluttered softly, a warning against the brewing storm as the murmurs of the crowd crescendoed, building a tide of tension. The community's collective gaze bore down on me, stifling yet demanding, and the very stones beneath my feet felt alive with the weight of their expectations. I scanned the crowd, faces a kaleidoscope of fear and determination. Shouts erupted, each voice infused with conviction, echoing off the stone walls. The rustle of banners whipped in the wind, fabric against stone creating a dissonant symphony. Vibrations coursed through my body, each thud of my heart reverberating in my chest, a reminder of the stakes at hand. In the distance, the cracked stone pedestal rose where leaders towered, their words weaving a tight net of loyalty that ensnared everyone present. As the argument escalated, a piercing scream sliced through the noise, shock rippling through the crowd. Dread pooled in my stomach as I turned to see my sister crumpled on the ground, her skin ashen and lifeless, blending with the stone underfoot. Gasps rippled through the throng, the fervent debate shifting to raw panic. I surged forward, the rough cobblestones scraping against my soles, my palms clammy as I fought through the throng, the oppressive heat of the crowd turning icy with dread. Dropping to my sister's side, the earth's dampness seeped into my clothes, her skin alarmingly cool against my fingertips. I pressed my palm to her forehead, noting the fevered heat that contrasted sharply with the chill of the square. Voices faded into a dull roar, the shouts morphing into indistinct murmurs as thoughts scrambled through my mind, tension coiled in my throat, but as the murmurs began to swell once more, determination ignited within me. I would confront the community's wrath, the shame of defiance, if it meant saving my sister. With resolve firmed like steel, I lifted my chin, my gaze tracking the narrow pathway leading away from the square and toward the forbidden medicine. The choice lay heavy upon my shoulders, but the faint whisper of hope ignited a fire within me that I would not let be extinguished. The midday sun bore down on the gorge of Statue Square, illuminating the towering statues that loomed over the crowd, their dark stone faces witnesses to the turmoil below. The air was thick with the acrid scent of sweat and smoke, mingling with the anticipation that crackled like electricity. Briar Ingram stood at the center of it all, her heart thudding in her chest as she pushed through a sea of bodies. Urgency gnawed at her mind, a relentless reminder of her sister's plight. Frail and fading, she needed the hidden cache of medicine before the week slipped away. Each moment felt like a dagger, the community's unrest echoing in her ears, urging Briar to act.
3 days remained, and with every passing second the weight of her sister's need bore heavily on her shoulders. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself and took her first step toward hope. Briar edged closer to the narrow path she had spotted earlier, her steps faltering as doubt crept in. The crowd surged, voices rising in a cacophony of dissent. Community leaders stood in a tight formation, their postures rigid and unyielding. "We demand loyalty," one shouted, his voice slicing through the chaos. The pressure of their demands felt like a vice around her throat. Could she risk the fallout of betrayal? Sweat trickled down her brow, and her hands trembled slightly. Loyalty meant safety, but it also meant losing her sister. Time was slipping away, and so was her courage. With a surge of adrenaline, she sidestepped a group of agitated townsfolk, their flushed faces betraying their fervor. Each heartbeat echoed like a countdown, reminding her of the stakes. She could almost visualize the glimmer of the medicine in her mind, just a few more steps. But before she could advance, the leaders shifted, their eyes locking onto her with a predatory intensity. "You think to betray us for a sister?" Another leader barked, stepping forward with a challenge. Briar's gut twisted. The path ahead closed off, and she felt the weight of the community's wrath bearing down on her. Was it worth it to save one life and risk the ire of the whole community? As she stood there, the crowd's anger surged, a force that pressed against her chest. Each moment of indecision stretched painfully, like an hourglass pouring sand, marking her dwindling time. A shout erupted, voices blending into a storm of emotion. Briar gasped, her vision narrowing as she glanced at the leaders, their demands pressing in on her. "You must speak for the community's future," one insisted, blocking her path with a raised hand. 2 days remained until her sister succumbed to illness, and here she was, trapped between duty and desperation. Briar's thoughts raced, the clock ticking down.
Chapter 3. Echoes of Resolve. Dawn broke over the gorge of Statue Square, casting a muted glow around the towering figures of dark stone, their weathered faces heavy with the weight of history. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, sharp and invigorating, while faint smoke from flickering torches curled through the cool morning air like ghosts. Briar stepped onto the cracked stone pedestal, its rough surface biting into her palms as she steadied herself. The cobblestones beneath her worn boots were slick with moisture, echoing the tension in the crowd, a living, breathing entity pulsing with anticipation and fear. Murmurs thrummed in the air, weaving a tapestry of anxiety as the first rays of light illuminated the path leading deeper into the gorge. This was her moment, a pressure coiling in her chest like a spring. Briar scanned the crowd, faces flickering in the dim light, some resolute, others twisted with anger. The distant shouts of the mob rang like ominous thunder, vibrating through her bones. She raised her voice, cutting through the murmurs. "We won't let fear keep us quiet." The response was electric. Voices rose and fell, a swell of hope and defiance pushing back against the oppressive atmosphere. The statues loomed around her, their stony gazes both judgmental and supportive, urging her on as she spoke. Every word hit like a rock tossed in water, sending ripples out, but the noise of dissent grew stronger, a reminder that danger was close. Briar clenched her fists, the rough edges of the pedestal biting into her palms as she steeled her resolve. The smell of sweat mingled with the musty scent of the gorge, a reminder of the fear that filled the air. The metallic tang of fear clung to her palate. Just as she prepared to speak again, a shout pierced the murmur. A member of the mob stepped forward, sneering, his face twisted in rage. "You think your words can change anything?" His voice sliced through the crowd, silencing them with chilling finality. Briar's breath hitched, dread pooling in her stomach at the coldness of his challenge. Behind her, the statues loomed larger in the dim light, shadows stretching ominously, warning her of the consequences of her stand. The crowd shifted uneasily, faces tightening with uncertainty. Each heartbeat hammered in her ears, a reminder of what hung in the balance. "We have the right to speak," she shouted, her voice rising above the tension, but the words felt fragile against the weight of the mob's fury. The ground beneath her was damp and uneven, shifting with every anxious step the crowd took. The air thickened, choking her with the scent of smoke and the acrid tang of fear. She could see the flickering torches reflected in their eyes, wild and desperate, and for a moment doubt crept in, wrapping around her like ivy, threatening to choke her resolve. As the mob closed in, shadows lurked around the square, the statues standing like sentinels caught in a moment of indecision. The air in the gorge of Statue Square was thick with anticipation. The morning mist clung to the uneven cobblestones beneath Briar Ingram's feet. She stood on the cracked pedestal, her attire a vibrant contrast to the somber grey of the towering statues surrounding her. Each figure represented a piece of history, some steeped in oppression, others in liberation. The murmurs of dissenters and the angry shouts from the mob created a discordant mix of shouts and murmurs, heightening the tension in the air. The faint scent of smoke from flickering torches blended with the mustiness of the gorge, evoking childhood memories of freedom. Briar felt a tightness grip her stomach as she searched for the right words, her fingers nervously fiddling with her notebook, a symbol of her hope and uncertainty. Was it too late to ignite a fire that could change everything? Briar paused, the crowd's murmurs swirling around her like the cool breeze that swept through the square. Her gaze darted from face to face, each furrowed brow, an anxious glance amplifying her doubt. "Hear me, fellow dreamers," she began, her voice steady yet soft, coaxing a timid flame to life. "We stand at a precipice. To remain silent invites darkness. Our voices, our art, are our weapons against oppression. We must—" A sharp bark of laughter cut through her, harsh and mocking. The mob's leader, a hulking figure cloaked in shadows, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "Think you can sway them, Briar?" he sneered, breath heavy with smoke and rage. "You're barking up the wrong tree. These folks know what happens when they speak out. Better to keep your mouth shut, or you'll find that pedestal a little less comfortable." Briar fidgeted with her notebook, glancing nervously at the crowd. She held her ground, hands gesturing as if to lift the fear from the air. "But can we stand by while others are silenced? When I was younger, I watched a friend's creation, an expression of love, be reduced to ashes. We cannot let that happen again." The crowd shifted, a ripple of uncertainty coursing through them. Some faces reflected her passion, while others wore masks of doubt, eyes flickering to the menacing figure before them. Her expression wavered between loyalty to her brother and self-preservation, as she caught a glimpse of Rowan, his face torn between support and fear. "Together we can paint a vision of change?" She pressed, her voice rising above the chaos. Yet just as a few heads turned in her direction, a chorus of jeers erupted from the mob, puncturing her fragile hope. The oppressive weight of fear suffocated the air. Would her words be enough to protect her brother, to safeguard the freedom they all yearned for? She inhaled sharply, the musty smell of the gorge mingling with smoke, a reminder of battles fought and lost. This moment could change everything, but at what cost? Briar stepped into the center of the gorge of Statue Square, the midday sun bearing down on her body, which shook with anxiety. The crowd loomed, a mass of anger and frustration, their voices rising in a cacophony that threatened to drown her out. "We have the power to speak out, to create," she had shouted moments before, but now the urgency pressed down on her chest. Time slipped by, each second a reminder of the impending danger. If she didn't sway this mob soon, her loved one would suffer irreversible consequences. With 3 days remaining until the week's end, each heartbeat echoed in her ears, intensifying the rising stakes. She had to make them reconsider their violent approach to dissent before it was too late. The crowd erupted, a wave of hostility crashing against her, drowning her words. "Shut up!" someone shouted, pointing at a lone figure attempting to speak against the tide of anger, their voice barely breaking through the chaos. Briar's heart raced, amplifying the urgency of the moment. She caught sight of the figure, a frail man trembling under the weight of the mob's ire. In that instant, her resolve hardened. Violence wouldn't heal their wounds, it would deepen them. But the mob surged, hungry for blood, their shouts drowning out any reason. As Briar stepped forward, her breath quickened, the heat of the crowd pressing against her like a wall of fire. "We're stronger united in peace," she yelled, her voice quaking. The mob turned, their eyes aflame with fury, and a knot twisted in her gut as she glimpsed her loved one in the crowd, their face pale, eyes wide with dread. Time slipped by, each second a reminder of the impending danger. Would they survive this? "Briar, get back!" A voice rang out, and she turned to see her loved ones staggering, their strength waning. Panic surged within her. She couldn't let them be hurt in this fray. "Please, you have to listen," she cried, desperation lacing her tone. But the crowd shifted, an angry tide that recoiled from her plea, eyes narrowing with hostility. They were too far gone, caught in a storm of rage that refused to relent. She had to act, and fast, before they lost everything. But as she stepped closer, the mob's anger boiled over. Someone lunged at the frail man, fists raised, and Briar surged forward, adrenaline flooding her veins. "Stop!" she screamed, but the words fell into the void. The crowd pressed against her, and chaos erupted around her, a tempest of fury and fear.
The moment was critical. Her loved one's health depended on her success in this moment. If they didn't find a way to quell this violence, the consequences would be permanent. She faced a terrifying choice: to risk everything to save those she loved. As the mob's chaos reached a peak, Briar felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a shroud. She knew she had to.
Dusk settled over the gorge of Statue Square, casting an orange and purple glow across the rocky terrain. The towering statues, remnants of a tumultuous past, loomed over the gathering crowd like silent witnesses to the chaos unfolding below. But beauty eluded Briar Ingram, who stood frozen among the turmoil, her heart pounding against her ribcage. The aftermath of the mob's violence lay scattered like shards of glass, shouts for justice intertwined with cries of fear. Only 3 days remained before the medicine could no longer save her loved one, and each moment felt like a dagger twisting in her gut. Should she raise her voice for free speech, or turn away from the cause she believed in to protect the one person who mattered most? She paced, running a hand through her hair, the weight of her choice pressing on her. Briar's gaze darted across the square where protesters rallied against oppression. Their fervor ignited a spark within her, a yearning to join them, to shout alongside them. Yet the image of her loved one, pale and frail, haunted her thoughts. "You must decide, Briar. You cannot champion both causes." The words echoed in her mind like a relentless challenge. With each passing second, the weight of her indecision pressed down harder. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder from the hospital, a countdown to the moment when her loved one's health would spiral beyond recovery. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the urge to flee from the suffocating expectation. A scuffle broke out nearby, the sound of fists colliding with flesh cutting through her spiraling thoughts. Briar stood frozen, her breath hitching as the injured cried out, their voices blending with the mob's shouts in a chaotic symphony. This was no ordinary confrontation, this was violence, and Briar clenched her fists, her heart racing with panic. What if my strength falters? What if my stand only deepens their peril? Doubt swelled within her, threatening to consume her resolve. Each second slipped through her fingers like sand, and time was running out. Briar, a voice pierced through the chaos. It was Talia, her fierce ally, eyes wide with urgency. "We need you to lead this. People are looking to you." But Briar shook her head. The thought of leading, of inspiring others, felt like a betrayal to the one who lay suffering. "I can't, Talia, not while their lives hang in the balance." The seconds ticked on, each one a painful reminder of her loved one's dwindling chance for survival. Talia's expression shifted, a mix of frustration and understanding. "We can't wait. If you don't act now, everything you've fought for will." Dusk enveloped the statue's marsh gorge in a cloak of shadow, the fading light casting elongated silhouettes against the rising mist. Briar Ingram leaned against the cold stone of an ancient statue, its weathered features a reminder of those who fought long ago. 3 days remained, 3 days to rally support for free speech before the town council met to silence dissent. Recent violence felt like a heavy stone on her chest, almost crushing her resolve. Each heartbeat echoed like a ticking clock, urging her to confront her fears about the backlash she'd face if she chose to stand up. Save her loved one or risk everything she believed in. Briar inhaled the damp earth and the tang of moss, attempting to silence the chaos swirling in her mind. But the memory of her loved one's pale face haunted her, a stark reminder that without the medicine, hope would slip away. 3 days loomed ahead. If she failed to act, if she remained silent, the consequences would be permanent, stretching like shadows into the future. Her heart raced, a rapid thrum against her ribs, as doubt clawed at her mind. What if her actions put her loved one in greater danger? What if the community turned against her, labeling her a traitor? Panic gripped her throat, forcing her to open her eyes and focus on the statues that had witnessed centuries of struggle. Would they judge her indecision? A twig snapped nearby, jolting Briar from her thoughts. She turned, her instincts sharpening as she spotted a figure approaching, a friend, but also a potential liability. "Briar," the voice called, urgency lacing every syllable. "We need to talk about the protest. Time isn't on our side." A swell of anxiety surged within her. She longed to gather her supporters, to strategize for a peaceful protest, but her fear clawed at her like a wild animal. "I'm uncertain about the risk, Sam.
What if my actions endanger them further? The choice felt like a heavy burden, knowing that inaction could lead to losing everything. As darkness deepened, the air thickened with tension. Briar took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. She could either stand up for justice and risk alienation from her community, or cower in silence, allowing oppression to prevail. The thought of her loved ones suffering suffocated her resolve. "We can't wait, Briar," Sam insisted, his voice rising against the backdrop of rustling leaves. "By the end of the week, they'll have crushed any hope for free expression." Briar's stomach churned, the pressure mounting. The choice was not just about her anymore, it was about those who needed her voice, with a renewed sense of purpose. She nodded, feeling fear transform into determination.
Chapter 4. Whispers Among Stone. Briar stood before the thrumming crowd in the gorge of Statues Square. Their stares pierced her skin. The chill from the wind whispered of the urgency that had driven her here. Shadows flickered among the towering figures of stone, each a testament to both oppression and liberation, fragments of a history she had come to challenge. Today she would confront the very foundation of their identity, the statue looming behind her, its unyielding gaze fixed on the future she envisioned. Her voice steadied, a thin thread of resolve weaving through her resolve as she faced the tempest she had unleashed. The air was charged with tension, the scent of damp earth and smoke swirling around her, anchoring her to this moment. No turning back now. This statue, a monument to oppression, stands as a reminder of the chains that bind us. Briar's voice sliced through the murmurs, her hands slicing the air for emphasis. A few heads nodded, but the majority remained unmoved, their expressions hardening like the stone behind her. She scanned the sea of faces, friends and neighbors, their features etched with loyalty to a history that now stood against her. The weight of her conviction pressed down, yet she pushed forward, words tumbling from her lips like stones. "It glorifies a past that shackles us. We must dismantle it to free ourselves." A ripple of dissent surged through the crowd. "But it's our history," a voice from the back called out, familiar yet jarring. Briar's stomach knotted at Sam's furrowed brow, a tempest of conflict hidden behind his calm demeanor. "Without it, we lose our identity." The crowd echoed his sentiment, their unease palpable, a collective heartbeat that threatened to drown her out. Briar's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a debate, it felt like a fracture splitting her world in two. Friends turned adversaries, memories of shared laughter tainted by this chasm. The tension thickened, choking her as another voice rose, a woman she had grown up with, hands trembling. "My grandfather fought for that statue. It represents our struggle." Each word struck Briar like a fist, the burden of the past crashing against her aspirations. The crowd shifted restlessly, their unity slipping away like grains of sand. Briar clenched her fists, grounding herself. "But at what price do we cling to these memories?" she implored, fervor igniting her resolve. "Is our identity built on oppression? Can we not honor our past without glorifying it?" Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Briar searched the crowd, yearning for any sign of understanding, but faces shifted like shadows, each one reflecting a different battle within. The statue loomed behind her, a sentinel of division. She took a breath, steadying herself. Morning light spilled into the gorge of Statues Square, illuminating the weathered stone faces that loomed over the gathered crowd. The smell of fried fish wafted from a nearby vendor, mingling with the earthy aroma of foraged mushrooms and the sweet scent of wild berries, creating a tapestry of scents that tugged at Briar's stomach. She stood at the base of the largest statue, a wave of tension gripping her, making it hard to breathe as she prepared to address her neighbors. Many clutched steaming bowls of stewed roots, their faces a mix of curiosity and hostility. The muted colors of their woven tunics blended with the gray stone, a reminder of the weight of tradition that surrounded them. Today she would seek to challenge that weight, though the chill in the air hinted that the spirits of the vanished people were watching. Briar took a deep breath, her resolve tightening like the fabric of her tunic. As she stepped forward, she clasped her hands in front of her, bowing her head slightly, a gesture of respect to the elders watching from the edges of the square. "Friends, neighbors," she called out, her voice steady but strained. "We gather here not just to honor our past, but to forge a future free from the shadows of these statues that divide us." She paused, scanning the crowd for familiar faces, but all she found were tight lips and skeptical brows, their attention captured more by fried fish than her words.
A ripple of dissent stirred within the crowd, echoing the unease settling in her stomach. A stout man in a colorfully dyed tunic shook his head, the gesture sharp and dismissive. "You want to dismantle what our ancestors built? You tread on sacred ground, Briar. Speak no ill of the vanished." His voice rose above the murmurs, and several others nodded, their bowls of stewed roots forgotten in their laps. Their collective gaze bore down on Briar, sending a chill through her bones. The superstition hung thick in the air. Stepping on the shadows of the statues brought misfortune, and here she was, daring to challenge the very foundation of their beliefs. Despite the rising tension, Briar pressed on, her breath quickened as she spoke. "We can honor our ancestors without living in their shadows." She caught the eye of her friend Elowen, who stood at the back, her hands clasped tightly together, barely concealing a tremor. Briar swallowed hard as she caught Elowen's down-turned gaze. The gap between them felt like a chasm. "Briar, think of the ancestors." Another voice rang out, this one more reasoned but still filled with urgency. It was Kellen, a stone carver, known for his intricate designs that adorned the statues. "You risk shunning not just yourself, but all of us. Speak of change, and you may find the spirits turning against you." The warning.
The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the statue's marsh gorge, shimmering off the still waters that cradled the towering stone figures. Briar, her dark hair cascading loosely, stood at the edge, the scent of wet earth mingling with the pungent aroma of marsh reeds drifting in the breeze. She absent-mindedly plucked a handful of wild berries from a nearby bush, their sweetness a fleeting comfort against the weight of her mission. Faces emerged from the thicket, their tunics woven from reeds, colors muted by the dampness of the marsh. The air was thick with tension, an unseen threat clung to the statues, as if the spirits of the vanished people were waiting, watching her every move. Briar shared the berries with her companions, a small gesture of camaraderie amidst their unease. They hesitated, their fingers brushing against her skin, a brief moment of connection before apprehension seeped in. Tamsin, glancing over her shoulder at the encroaching shadows, whispered, "What if they come for us? The defenders won't stand down so easily." Briar felt a surge of resolve tangle with the fear of violence, tightening her grip on the remaining berries as she rallied her friends. As they huddled closer, Briar took a deep breath, willing her voice to steady. "Fear can't be our compass. This statue is a testament to who we are. We must hold our ground together." She raised her head slightly, clasping her hands before her in a gesture of respect, hoping to instill courage, but doubt flickered in their eyes, and they averted their gazes, as if avoiding the shadow of the statues beyond her. "Legends say that stepping on the shadows of the statues invites misfortune. We must tread lightly," she added, determination surging within her as she sought to anchor their resolve with her words. Suddenly a commotion erupted from the path leading to the gorge. The defenders arrived, their voices rising in a chorus of threats, and Briar's allies exchanged fearful glances before retreating, breaking the unspoken code of loyalty. Heat surged through Briar as anger simmered just below the surface, but she swallowed it down, refusing to point fingers, an act that would only deepen the divide. Instead, she steeled herself, her gaze fixed on the approaching figures, each heartbeat a drum of defiance. The police were making their way through the crowd, a reminder of the risks they faced. "May the gods spare us their intervention," she muttered under her breath, a silent prayer to Alaris, the keeper of secrets, for protection and guidance. As the defenders drew closer, Briar could hear their jeers, words laced with disdain. "You think you can challenge the stone? You'll end up like the others, silenced," one shouted, and panic spread among her remaining allies. Tamsin stood rooted, trembling, but Briar stepped forward, ready to confront the tide of hostility. Shadows danced ominously at her feet as she faced the defenders, her heart steadying with resolve. She would not let the statue's silence dictate her fate. With one last look at the advancing figures, she whispered a prayer to Marith, hoping. Dusk enveloped the gorge of Statue Square like a thick fog, the air heavy with the remnants of chaos. The cries of protest reverberated in Briar Ingram's ears as she stood at the edge of the square, grappling with the consequences of her actions. Isolation weighed upon her, allies had turned away, and the ideals she had once fought for now felt like chains. 3 days remained until the deadline loomed ominously over her, demanding swift action. If she couldn't save her loved one, the repercussions would be dire. Briar inhaled sharply, determination clashing with the fear of further rejection, twisting her stomach. She had to reach out, but the thought of facing that possibility sent a wave of unease through her. The remnants of the protest lingered, whispers of doubt hanging in the air like fog. Briar squeezed her eyes shut, images of her friends, once united in purpose, now scattered like leaves before a storm.
Each face that flashed in her mind felt like a wound. They had rallied for freedom, yet here she was, standing alone, burdened by chains of her past. Shadows deepened, amplifying the pressure to act. Time slipped away, reminding her of the urgency. If she didn't reach out soon, alienation would become her only reality. "Briar," a voice called from across the square, breaking her reverie. It was Finn, the last of her supporters, his expression strained as he approached. "What are you doing? You can't just stand here. We need to regroup." Panic surged in Briar's chest. She had already lost so many. The thought of losing Finn felt like a blow. "Facing them feels like walking into a storm again, and I'm not sure I can handle it," she said, her voice quaking slightly. "What if they reject me? What if they turn against everything we fought for?" Finn's brow furrowed, urgency in his voice. "We can't afford to doubt now. If you hesitate, we risk everything we've fought for." An urgent pressure mounted within Briar as she weighed her options. She could remain silent and risk everything in the name of pride, or reach out and face the very real possibility of rejection. The knowledge that her loved one's life hung in the balance added unbearable weight to her decision. "I have to try," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt, determination igniting a spark within her. As she pulled out her phone, she glanced at the screen. 3 days left. If she could mend the rifts before the end of the week, perhaps she could salvage her dreams of change, perhaps she could save her loved one, yet doubt loomed, casting a shadow over her resolve. Just as she began typing a message, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A group of figures loomed at the edge of the square, their postures tense and uncertain. Briar froze, fear constricting her throat.
As dusk settled over the gorge of Statues Square, the sun dipped behind the towering statues, casting long shadows across the crowd gathered for Briar Ingram's impassioned plea. Briar stood at the forefront, her pulse quickening, the rhythm echoing her rising anxiety as she faced a community teetering on the brink of collapse. "We must unite, my friends, for the survival of our future," she called, her voice trembling yet melodic. Urgency laced her words, each sentence a thread woven into the fabric of their unity. The threat of failure hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over her resolve. If she couldn't rally them by week's end, a loved one would suffer irrevocably, forcing her to act against the very community she cherished. Their expectations pressed on Briar, threatening to crush her resolve, and time slipped away, each tick of the clock filling the air with urgency. Briar scanned the crowd, a mix of hope and fear written across their faces. Tension filled the air, a palpable reminder of the fractures within their ranks. "Together we can challenge the oppressive structures that seek to silence our voices," she urged, her voice rising with desperation. Just as she began to weave a vision of unity, a loud voice cut through her fervor. "What if your grand vision leads us into utter ruin, Briar?" The dissenting voice belonged to Marcus, a former ally turned critic. His words struck like a dagger, igniting murmurs of uncertainty among the crowd. Panic clawed at Briar's chest. She had only days left to secure their support, but now doubt festered in the hearts of those she sought to inspire. "People are suffering while you play the martyr," Marcus shouted, his eyes blazing with conviction. "You want us to follow you into a fight that may tear us apart?" The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably, voices rising in angry agreement, and Briar's pulse quickened. Each tick of the clock echoed in her mind, a reminder that if she failed to unite them, her loved one would pay the price. A week was all she had, and already time was slipping through her fingers. Briar clenched her fists, feeling sweat bead at her brow as emotions clashed within her. Could she turn this tide, or would her dream of unity crumble before her? "You don't understand what it's like?" Briar shouted back, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, for those who will suffer if we don't act now." But the murmurs grew louder, the crowd's confidence wavering like a candle in the wind. Briar knew she had to respond decisively. With every passing second, the stakes rose higher, and she felt the weight of the moment press down on her like a vice. As the descent spread like wildfire, Briar took a step closer, her heart pounding. "We have to choose now," she cried, desperation spilling into her voice. "Fight for our future or let fear tear us apart." Chapter 5. Whispers in the Shadows. The gorge of Statues Square bristled with tension, bodies pressing against each other like storm clouds ready to unleash their fury. Briar stood at the edge, her pulse raced with the harsh cries of dissent washing over her, each shout a stark reminder of the chaos brewing in the community. Time slipped away, threatening to drown her in uncertainty. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke from flickering torches battling against the encroaching dusk. She scanned the crowd for familiar faces, searching for safety, but found only shadows shifting under the weight of fear. The ground trembled, not just from the unrest, but from the knowledge that if she didn't act, everything she cherished could slip away. A voice erupted from the center, cutting through the clamor. "You think they care about us?" A wild-eyed man spat his words like venom. Briar squinted, urgency surging as she sought the source. Leaders, once protectors, towered over the crowd, their expressions stern and unyielding. Dark banners fluttered above like ominous birds, each splash of color a mockery. A knot tightened in her stomach. What had they become? Her fists clenched, nails biting into her palms. These leaders, once seen as saviors, now wielded fear as their weapon. She swallowed hard, tasting iron, a bitter reminder of the stakes at play. Would they unleash their fury on her loved ones? The crowd surged, panic rippling through Briar's resolve. Shouts morphed into screams, bodies jostling as people fled or pushed forward, desperate for answers. A woman caught her eye, terror etched on her features as she clutched a child tightly. The child's dirt-streaked face sent a jolt through Briar. She couldn't let this chaos consume them. "Stay together," she shouted, her voice straining against the din. But who would hear her? The air grew heavy, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Silence was a luxury she couldn't afford. A confrontation ignited in the square. Dissenters, fueled by anger, faced off against the community leaders, their words escalating into threats. Briar's heart raced as she watched, frozen. The leaders responded with harsh gestures, signaling their enforcers, and the crowd recoiled like a wounded animal. The scent of smoke thickened, mingling with her rising panic. She had to act. But how? The moment stretched, filled with uncertainty, as fear churned within her, battling her instinct to protect. A deafening explosion shattered the tension, ripping through the air like a jagged blade. Briar gasped, the sound hollow as the world around her froze. The crowd erupted into chaos, bodies collided while cries of terror filled the air. She stumbled back, the ground. As dusk settled over the gorge of Statues Square, Briar Ingram stood amidst the thrumming crowd, shadows stretching long like fingers, grasping at the last rays of light. Towering statues loomed overhead, their dark stone faces carved with both grim and heroic histories, casting an oppressive weight over the assembly. The damp scent of earth mingled with the acrid tang of smoldering torches, wrapping around her like a clammy cloak. The uneven cobblestones beneath her worn boots shifted unpredictably, each step igniting a spark of anxiety. The soft rustle of banners whispered secrets of dissent, mingling with distant cries that echoed through the gorge, creating a tense atmosphere charged with fear and anticipation. Briar ducked behind a statue, the cold stone pressing against her back, anchoring her. She peered through the gaps in the crowd, scanning for familiar faces among the chaos. The tension crackled in the air, illuminating the faces of the gathered townsfolk, their eyes wide with dread. A sudden sharp shout pierced the murmurs, a voice she recognized rising above the cacophony. Her friend Anna stood at the edge of the square, cornered by a group of enforcers, their dark uniforms stark against the fading light. Briar clenched her fists, rough cobblestones digging into her palms as fear surged. The loudspeaker blared, a mechanical voice slicing through the tension. "Attention, curfew is now in effect. Return to your homes immediately." The announcement echoed off the stone statues, amplifying the growing panic among the crowd. Briar's heart thudded with urgency. She couldn't lose Anna, not when hope felt so fragile. Bodies pressed closer, seeking safety in numbers. Briar stepped from behind the statue, the cool stone replaced by the warmth of her racing thoughts, ready to move toward Anna, praying for the strength to break through the fear gripping the square. But as she took a step forward, another voice boomed over the loudspeaker, filled with authority and menace. "This is your final warning." The words hung heavy in the air, a threat that sent dread coursing through Briar. She froze, the world narrowing to the space between her and Anna, the cries of the crowd fading into a distant hum. The gorge, with its towering statues and uneven paths, felt like a trap, and Briar stood at its precipice, caught between the urge to act and the suffocating weight of fear. In that moment, the square transformed into a living entity, demanding sacrifice and resolve. She couldn't let darkness win. Not yet. Darkness crept in, enveloping the square in unease. Briar forced herself to breathe, the musty scent of damp stone invading her lungs. The stone archway marking the entrance loomed large in her periphery, a potential escape route, but leaving now felt like abandoning hope. Her throat tightened, each breath a labor.
The rustle of the crowd swelled, panic rising like steam, and Briar...
As dusk settled over Statue's marsh gorge, Briar Ingram stood at the edge, surrounded by towering cliffs that cast long, ominous shadows. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the frantic whispers of her neighbors, their faces pale with fear. "They'll come for us next, Briar," someone cried, voice quaking. Just 3 days remained until the brutal retaliation she had learned about would strike, and the weight of their fear bore heavily on her shoulders. Inspiration bubbled inside her, urging her to rally them against the encroaching darkness. This was her moment to ignite a spark of hope, to remind them that art and ideas could shield them from the violence threatening their fragile community. The despair in the air was palpable as Briar surveyed the familiar faces twisted in horror, friends and family now standing on the brink of hopelessness. She swallowed hard, gathering her resolve. "We can't let fear be our master," she shouted, her voice slicing through the murmurs. A few heads turned, but many remained fixed on the ground, lost in their dread. A knot tightened in her stomach. If they didn't act, they would be consumed by the very oppression they feared. "If we don't act before the week ends, we lose everything." A gasp rippled through the crowd, and Briar felt a surge of urgency. Their faith was waning. "What can we do?" someone asked, eyes wide with terror. The ominous ticking of a clock echoed in her mind, counting down to their last chance at freedom. "We must gather our strength and resources, like artists preparing for a great unveiling." Doubt clawed at her. Would they trust her? Would they stand with her against their own leaders? "But what if we're wrong? What if we fight and lose everything?" A man's voice cut through the tension. Briar turned to him, desperation mirroring her own turmoil. "To remain silent is to stifle our own voices, silencing the very art that defines us," she retorted, urgency fueling her words. The atmosphere thickened as she recognized the deadline. It wasn't merely about saving loved ones, but standing up for their very souls. They had to choose now. Briar's pulse quickened as she scanned the faces around her. Fear was etched in their features, yet determination flickered in their eyes. "We can't wait any longer. We must meet tonight, plan our next steps." The murmurs grew louder, a mix of uncertainty and reluctant agreement, just as hope began to take root. A shadow fell over them, a figure emerging from the depths of the gorge. Briar's breath caught in her throat. Whoever it was, they were not here to help. The decision loomed above her, a stark reminder of the threat they faced. Action was no longer a choice. It was an urgent necessity. The night air in the gorge of Statue's Square crackled with tension, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the whispers of uncertainty. Briar Ingram stood atop a cracked stone pedestal, her chest pounding with urgency as she faced the sea of anxious faces before her. "Let us unite in purpose," she called, her voice slicing through the murmurs of doubt. Time slipped away, each moment pressing down on them. In just a few days the retaliatory campaign would strike. If they failed to act, their loved ones would suffer irreparably. 3 days left to inspire courage, 3 days to protect her community from the encroaching violence. They couldn't falter now. They had to stand united against the looming darkness. The crowd shifted uneasily, shadows flickering in the dim light as Briar's words wavered under the weight of their fear. She scanned their faces, hollowed eyes, trembling hands, a sea of uncertainty. "Look around." Her voice cracked with unsteady resolve. "We can't let them divide us. We have to protect our families, our homes." Just then a piercing scream echoed from the distance, slicing through the night. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, terror tightening their throats. The threat was palpable, amplifying the dread coiling within her. The lights overhead flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced like specters around them. A chill crept through the air as Briar prepared to urge them once more, when a group of masked figures emerged from the darkness, weapons glinting in the dim light. The crowd stiffened, paralyzed by fear. Briar's mind raced. They had come for confrontation, and the stakes had never been higher. She had tried to inspire hope, but now all she felt was the suffocating weight of impending violence. "We don't have time for this," she shouted, her voice revealing her inner turmoil. Each passing second threatened to steal her chance to save them. Panic gripped Briar as she faced the masked intruders, their intentions shrouded in menace. "We need to leave," someone cried from the back of the crowd, but Briar raised her hand, grounding herself despite the storm brewing within. "No, we shall defend our freedom." The crowd stood frozen, fear gripping them. The masked figures advanced, and Briar's resolve hardened. She had to make a choice, stand her ground and risk everything,
or retreat and condemn her loved ones. The relentless ticking of the clock reverberated in her mind, reminding her that failure was not an option. She had to act, and she had to act now. As the masked figures closed in, Briar glanced at the faces around her. Fear and defiance tangled in their expressions. Together we rise, or divided we fall.
The gorge of Statues Square stretched out before Briar, shadows stretching long and menacing under the flickering glow of torches. Dark stone statues loomed above her, their chiseled features illuminated just enough to evoke both reverence and dread. The musty scent of damp earth and old stone filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of smoke curling up from the torches. The uneven cobblestones beneath her knees pressed into her skin, cool and unyielding, grounding her in the chaos unfolding around her. Distant shouts echoed through the square, punctuated by the rustle of banners that danced like phantoms in the night, a reminder of the tension gripping the crowd. The murmurs of the crowd swelled, a chorus of fear and defiance that resonated in Briar's chest. She looked up at the towering statues, their grim visages seeming to judge her indecision. Urgency clawed at her insides, each heartbeat echoing her rising anxiety. Anticipation crackled in the air, pressing down like a heavy weight that stifled her breath. A figure lunged forward, their mask glistening in the torchlight, and Briar swallowed, the acrid smoke filling her nostrils while a salty tang lingered on her tongue. Confronting them could either ignite hope or plunge her community deeper into despair. Briar's fingers brushed against the cracked stone pedestal at the center of the square, the texture rough and familiar, urging her to stand firm, to remember the ideals she once clung to. Betrayal twisted her ideals into a painful knot. "I cannot fail them once more," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor in the tumult around her. The distant shouts grew louder, a tide of voices swelling like a storm. The crowd shifted, feet scuffling against the cobblestones, creating a rhythm that felt at odds with the pounding of her heart. Briar's resolve solidified as she rose to her feet, the cobblestones firm beneath her as she faced the chaos. "Join me in this fight," she called out, her voice rising above the din. The air shimmered with tension, a charged silence hanging before the storm. Shadows flickered across the faces of her neighbors, their eyes wide with fear, yet glimmering with the hope she dared to ignite. As determination surged within her, she stepped forward, ready to confront the shadows of oppression, threatening to swallow them whole. The night deepened, shadows dancing wildly around her, as Briar stood resolute, the scent of smoke thickening in the air as she faced the masked figures, each breath a vow to protect the ones she loved. Chapter 6. Whispers of Stone. The statue's marsh gorge lay shrouded in a mist that whispered secrets of the past, its towering cliffs rising sharply against the morning light. Briar Ingram had little time for nostalgia, with just 3 days to uncover the hidden letter that could expose the conspiracy against the life-saving medicine her community desperately needed. If she failed, the consequences would be dire. Local authorities patrolled the gorge, their shadows lurking like predators, waiting to pounce on any sign of rebellion. Briar ducked behind a weathered statue, breath shallow, each heartbeat echoing the urgency of her mission. Morning light filtered through the trees, illuminating the path ahead, yet every second stretched impossibly, the heavy fog pressing down on her like an unyielding weight. Briar pressed forward, weaving past the ancient stone figures that guarded the gorge. How had it come to this? The oppressive regime stifled her community's voice, and the very medicine that could save her brother. Each step felt like a battle against doubt. Was it possible to find the letter before time slipped away? Suddenly she spotted a folded piece of parchment wedged between 2 stones. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, the ticking clock in her mind matching the rhythm of her racing heart. Just as her fingers grazed the paper, a shout pierced the air, freezing her in place. "Hey, you there!" The guard's voice sliced through the morning mist, and dread washed over her. Briar's instincts kicked in, no time for hesitation. She snatched the letter and shoved it into her pocket, springing to her feet as the guard's footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder with each desperate stride she took. She darted between the statues, breath coming in ragged gasps. The letter against her side felt like both a lifeline and a noose. If she got caught now, all would be lost.
Adrenaline surged, propelling her forward despite the fear gnawing at her mind. "I can't let them take this from me," she whispered, urging her legs to move faster, to evade the clutches of authority that threatened to crush her hopes. As Briar neared the gorge's edge, she stole one last glance behind her, dread coiling in her stomach. The guard was gaining on her, his shouts reverberating against the stone walls. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the sound of the rushing water below. She had the letter, the truth that could unite her people against the oppressive regime. But now she had to outsmart the very authorities who wanted to silence her. With a surge of determination, she leapt across a narrow ledge, barely catching herself before tumbling into the depths below. The guard stopped, rage igniting in his eyes. But she was free, at least for now. The letter pressed against her chest, a tangible reminder of her fragile hope. Time slipped away. She had to share this truth before it was too late.
The statue's marsh gorge loomed around Briar, the towering stone figures casting long shadows that loomed ominously over the damp earth. The musty aroma of wet soil clung to her boots, tugging at memories of her father's studio, where the scent of paint and clay mingled in the air like whispered promises. She grasped the letter tightly, its rough edges biting into her palm, a stark reminder of everything at stake. Rustling reeds swayed in the gentle breeze, echoing the distant calls of birds, as if nature itself held its breath, waiting for her next move. The tension tightened in Briar's chest, a vivid backdrop to her swirling thoughts, as she stood on the precipice of decision. Briar fidgeted, tracing the edges of the letter restlessly before settling onto a moss-covered stone that seeped coolness through her vibrant skirt. She flipped the letter open, the faint scent of ink mingling with the dampness around her, each word a pulse, thumping against her chest. What if she shared her vision of a mural, a canvas of hope, with her allies? Would they see the potential for change, or would fear choke their resolve? She glanced up at the statues, silent sentinels that bore witness to the struggles of countless others. "They fought for their voices, didn't they?" she murmured, the question hanging in the air, heavy and unyielding. No one answered. Not here. Not now. A cold shiver coursed through her as she considered the consequences of her actions. The way dissent was silenced and creativity crushed underfoot like brittle leaves loomed large in her mind. The fear of failure gripped her, making each breath feel like a struggle. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a melody wrapped in wisdom, whispering about the power of paint and clay to spark change. But what if it cost me everything? Her pulse raced, uncertainty swirling in her mind, threatening to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the gorge swirl around her, the rustling leaves, the distant gurgle of water, the pulse of life beneath the surface. A memory flickered, late nights spent arguing with friends about justice, creativity, freedom. They'd believed in the power of their voices, but what if she failed to inspire them now? Her fingers traced the edges of the letter, a line of hope mixed with deep-seated dread. "Will they listen?" she whispered, her voice barely breaking the silence. The gorge swallowed her words, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. Briar stood abruptly, the coolness of the mossy stone now a stark reminder of her indecision. A gust of wind swept through the gorge, rustling the reeds like an urgent whisper. "I can't be silent. I can't let fear win." Taking a deep breath, the letter burned in her hands, a potential spark ready to ignite a revolution. But would the flames consume her allies, or would they rise together, emboldened? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the gorge. Dusk descended over the gorge of Statues Square, casting elongated shadows that danced between the towering figures of dark stone, each representing a chapter of their community's tumultuous history. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint smoke from torches. Briar Ingram stood on a makeshift platform. Urgency surged through her as she clutched the hidden letter that would expose the conspiracy gripping their community. "Lend me your ears, kindred spirits," she called, her voice slicing through the murmurs. A flicker of hope ignited within her. She had only days left before the medicine would be lost forever, taking with it the chance to save her loved one. The seconds slipped away, 3 days left until the window for action closed. Time felt suffocating, and she had to rally the crowd before it was too late. "We must rise together to reclaim our truth." The crowd shifted uneasily, faces contorted in anger and indifference. A few shouted back, voices layered with resistance. "We don't need your lies, Briar." One man, red-faced and furious, stepped forward, fists clenched. "Change is dangerous. You'll ruin everything." A chill ran down her spine, but she couldn't back down now.
Drawing a deep breath, she forced her voice to rise above the chaos. Ponder this, dear friends. The statue debate is merely a shroud conjuring illusions to obscure our true vision. Briar's words echoed, but the crowd's anger surged like a tide, threatening to drown her out. "You're a traitor," someone shouted, and a chorus of agreement erupted from the masses. Her hands trembled as the weight of their collective disbelief pressed down on her. How could they not see? Her fingers dug into the letter, the edges biting into her palm. Behind her, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Was that a shadow shifting in the crowd? The urgency of the moment clawed at her. "We must unite. This is about our freedom." Suddenly, the murmurs escalated into shouts, drowning out her plea. A figure emerged from the throng, silhouetted against the dying light. Briar's breath quickened, and her hands trembled as she faced the figure, recognizing the glint of metal in the stranger's hand. "Stop," the figure commanded, voice low and menacing. "You need to leave now, or there will be consequences." Time felt suffocating as the crowd shifted, torn between fear and solidarity. Briar could feel their eyes on her, their hopes and fears colliding in a tumultuous wave. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to protect herself, but she couldn't abandon this fight. The stakes were too high. If they didn't act now, she would lose her loved one forever, and the community would fracture into chaos. "I shall not yield," she yelled, defiance fueling her.
Under the blaring midday sun, shadows clung to the edges of the gorge of Statues Square, where towering figures hewn from dark stone loomed ominously over the crowd. Briar stood at the cracked stone pedestal, her voice struggling to rise above the thick tension that enveloped the gathering. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and smoke, a reminder of the struggle that had brought them here. Images of her loved one in need flashed in her mind as she scanned the crowd, sensing the anticipation coiling tighter, a living thing, gripping the podium's edges, her knuckles turned white. "You will not silence me," she shouted, her words raw and fierce, but a glint of a weapon caught her eye, a stark reminder that the stakes were higher than ever. The crowd needed to awaken, and so did she. Briar's gaze swept across the audience, her eyes catching fearful and uncertain faces. Some leaned in, drawn by her intensity, while others recoiled, wide-eyed and ready to flee. She raised her chin defiantly, her heart pounding with urgency. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us." The words burst forth with fervor, but the shadowy figure stepped closer, a predator stalking its prey. His voice, a low rumble, sliced through the air like a blade. "You think you can sway them? You're nothing but a whisper in the wind, Briar. No one will stand with you." The crowd shifted restlessly, a palpable wave of unease. Fear gripped Briar's throat, urging her to break free. "Look around you," she shouted, hands outstretched, fingers trembling. "These statues bear witness to our struggle. We have fought too long to be silenced by fear." Desperation laced her voice, but the figure's laughter echoed back, cold and mocking. "Fear is a powerful weapon, dear girl. You'll see how quickly it can turn friends into foes." She locked eyes with a man in the front row. His furrowed brow betrayed his uncertainty. Briar leaned forward, her body a taut string about to snap. "What are we if we don't stand strong? We can't let him decide our fate anymore." Beneath the weight of her words, the crowd wavered. A few stepped back, while others clenched their fists, caught in the crossfire of fear and hope. The air thickened with unspoken tension, charged with the question, would they stand with her? The figure lunged forward, weapon raised, and chaos erupted. Shouts pierced the air as panic rippled through the crowd. Briar's heart sank as people stumbled and fled. "No, stay with me," she called, but her voice barely registered above the cacophony. She had to ground them, pull them back from the brink. "What will happen if we give in? Our silence will not save us." The crowd was fracturing, a mosaic of fear and resolve. Each gasp from Briar felt like a desperate plea for unity. The crowd shifted restlessly, a living entity of hope and fear, as Briar stood at the edge of the gorge of Statues Square. Sunlight fractured through the clouds, casting long shadows that danced across the stone faces of towering figures looming over the gathering. Each statue, a silent sentinel of history, seemed to watch with eyes filled with untold stories. The air buzzed with anticipation, mingling the scents of damp earth and the acrid smoke of flickering torches around the square's perimeter. Briar's heart raced, her shoulders tightening under the weight of responsibility. She locked eyes with a trembling woman and her child, a silent vow passed between them. "Together we stand firm against whatever comes." The words echoed, urgent and raw, as she stepped forward,
ready to fight for their future. We are the storm that fear cannot weather. Briar's voice sliced through the murmurs, a clarion call piercing the tension. Heads turned, eyes glinting with a mixture of dread and defiance. A figure cloaked in shadow thrust the weapon higher, a glimmer of steel catching the fading light. Anxiety rippled through the crowd, some gasping, others bracing for confrontation. Briar stood firm, hands clenched at her sides, every muscle coiled like a spring. Look at these statues. They've witnessed our struggles and our triumphs. We can't let their stories fade away. The air buzzed with indecision. A man shouted, his voice tremulous yet fierce. "We should flee. There's no sense in fighting," another countered, fists raised. "We fight for our loved ones. We fight for Briar." Conflict erupted, a tide of voices clashing like waves against the rocks. Briar scanned the crowd, looking for a nod or a gesture of solidarity amid the chaos. Her throat tightened, desperation clawing at her resolve. "Do you want to live in fear, or will you stand and face this together?" The figure advanced, each step a dark promise, weapon glinting ominously. Briar's heart raced, a lump forming in her throat as fear gripped her. She sensed the ground shift beneath her, the crowd splintering into factions, those who wanted to run and those who would stand their ground. "This isn't just about us anymore," she called out, voice steady despite the tremors beneath. "It's about our future, our families." A spark of unity flickered in some, yet shadows expanded, feasting on uncertainty. She could almost taste the tension, metallic and bitter. A cry rang out from the back, a child's wail shattering the silence. Briar's chest constricted as she turned, catching a glimpse of the woman with the child, eyes wide with terror. The sight propelled her forward. She raised her arms, palms open. "Look," she shouted, "we're not a—"
Chapter 7. Shadows of Resolve. Dusk settled over the gorge of Statues Square, the sun dipping low and casting elongated shadows that danced across the uneven cobblestones. Briar Ingram stood at the center, the urgency pulsing in the air. Before her stretched a crowd, faces a mix of anxious curiosity and crossed arms, their tension palpable. This was her moment, with the clock's relentless ticking echoing in her ears, her loved one's life hanging in the balance. She needed to advocate fiercely for free speech and the life-saving medicine that could not only heal bodies but also mend the fractured community around her. Failure was not an option. The stakes were too high and the consequences too dire to imagine by week's end. Briar's voice trembled as she spoke. "We stand at a crucial crossroads. This medicine isn't just a treatment. It's our chance to reclaim our voices and heal together." The murmurs of dissent rippled through the crowd, sharp as daggers. A group, visibly agitated, shouted back, "You don't know what you're asking. Change is dangerous." Time slipped through her fingers, the clock's relentless ticking echoing in her ears. If she didn't rally their spirits now, it might be too late. Just 3 days remained, and the tension thickened with each passing second. "We've always done things this way," a man yelled, his voice slicing through the air. Briar clenched her fists, battling the swell of doubt threatening to overwhelm her. "But what if sticking to the old ways means we're just standing still? Can we really afford to let fear hold us back?" The crowd shifted, uncertainty crackling like static electricity. The divide became clear, hopeful faces flickering with possibility, and fearful ones resolute against her message. If she faltered, she'd lose them all, and the moment would slip away like grains of sand through her fingers. "What if we fail?" someone whispered, fear morphing into a shadow that loomed over the gathering. Briar inhaled sharply, her breath coming in quick gasps. "What if we don't try?" she shot back, her voice gaining strength in her desperation. "By the end of this week, we will have to choose, embrace the unknown or cling to the shackles of fear. We can't let this moment pass." The air felt electric, yet tension remained, reminding her that hope without action was merely a dream. Briar stepped forward, her voice rising above the dissent. "Imagine a community where we can speak freely, heal together, and truly thrive. We cannot allow the specter of the unknown to stifle our voices." The crowd hesitated, caught between the familiar and the frightening. This was it, her last chance. Would they rally behind her words, or would they retreat? As dusk fell over the gorge of statues, the sun sank below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the cobblestones. Briar Ingram stood before the gathered townsfolk, her heart racing with urgency as the scent of fried fish mingled with the earthy aroma of marsh reeds. Street vendors called out to hungry workers, who paused for quick meals of water, lily cakes, and stewed roots, their voices creating a low hum beneath the weight of Briar's words. A child held a piece of dried meat, eyes wide with curiosity, while the elders stood with clasped hands and bowed heads awaiting her plea. Deep within Briar, hope flickered in the faces before her. Could she break through the veil of grief? Briar's voice rose above the murmur of the crowd. We stand at a crossroads, dear friends. This medicine is not merely a remedy, it is a beacon to reignite our flickering hope. She clenched her fists, the dried meat in her pocket a painful reminder of sacrifices made. A woman in the front row, her tunic faded and patched, spat onto the ground. Spare us your dreams, Briar. The last time you asked us to change, we lost our sons. Unease rippled through the crowd, eyes darting to the looming stone statues, their shadows cloaking the painful memories of the past. Briar shivered in the biting cold air, as if the spirits of the vanished were whispering their disapproval, warning her against her audacity. She paused, searching the faces for understanding. The ones we've lost would want us to fight for a better future, for every child who deserves to grow up free from fear. We cannot let the memories of the past chain us. A murmur of dissent rose from the crowd, but the child at the edge remained still, clutching a water lily cake, wide-eyed with curiosity. Briar pressed on, drawing strength from the act of sharing a meal, the communal bowl of stewed roots they had once enjoyed together. What would they say? She implored, her heart racing as she watched a few nod in reluctant agreement, a glimmer of hope illuminating their faces. A sharp intake of breath disrupted the moment as an older man with a weathered face stepped forward. He clasped his hands and bowed his head, a respectful gesture that rippled through the crowd. We cannot forget the pain, Briar, but we also cannot forget the living. I lost my family to silence, but I cannot let their memories die in vain. His voice carried weight, and Briar's heart raced as she saw a few townsfolk shift their weight, stepping closer and lifting their heads. Yet, the jeers continued, a reminder that change was a steep climb, one that might lead to more losses before it bore fruit. As dusk deepened, the relentless pressure of time squeezed her chest. Briar could almost hear the cries of the lost, the whispers of Alaris reminding her of the stakes at hand. With the gods' favor, let us... The midday sun blazed down on the gorge of Statues Square, illuminating the towering figures carved from dark stone that loomed over the crowd. Each statue bore testament to a history of both oppression and liberation, their somber expressions casting long shadows on the uneven cobblestones below. Briar Ingram stood at the center, pulse quickened, sweat trickling down her back as she gripped the edges of the wooden podium. Today was the day she had to ignite the crowd's passion for free speech and the life-saving medicine that could turn the tide against the illness ravaging their community. As she scanned the sea of faces, a knot twisted in her stomach. If she didn't succeed before the week was out, the chance to save her brother would vanish forever, leaving her with irreversible regret. We need to stand up for our voices, Briar urged, her voice trembling yet resolute, but the murmurs of dissent began to rise like a dark tide. What a joke! A voice boomed from the crowd, slicing through Briar's words. Laughter erupted, mocking her earnest plea. The vocal faction, a group she'd hoped to sway, grew bolder, their jeers echoing in the square. Briar's stomach churned. With each taunt, her supporters shifted uneasily, doubt creeping into their minds like a shadow. She had to regain control. She had to remind them of what was at stake. This medicine can save lives. It can save my brother, she shouted, desperation clawing at her throat. But the faction wouldn't relent, their laughter drowning her out, and as the seconds slipped away, she felt the pressure mount. Look at her, a desperate woman clinging to hope. The aggressor, a tall figure with a sneer that could curdle milk, stepped forward, eyes burning with challenge. Briar gasped, the crowd swayed, caught in the tension, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw her brother's face, a reminder of what she stood to lose. You think you can just demand free speech and expect us to follow? You're just a coward, hiding behind your words. His voice hammered at her supporters' resolve, driving nails of doubt into their hearts. She had to fight back, had to pull them from the edge of despair. Gulping down her fear, Briar summoned the strength from deep within. She took a step forward, locking eyes with the aggressor as she began to speak, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I lost my mother to this illness, and I watched my brother suffer. Every moment I hesitated, I thought of them. What does silence do when pain is all around us? The crowd fell silent, caught in the rawness of her words. She pressed on, weaving a tale of resilience and hope,
as a few voices began to rise in support, their faith flickering like candles in the dark, but the urgency of her mission loomed large. "We can't afford to lose this battle."
Dusk draped the gorge of Statues Square in a shroud of deepening shadows, the last remnants of sunlight spilling over the jagged cliffs like spilled ink. Towering dark stone statues loomed overhead, their features etched with the weight of history, some faces twisted in oppression, others resolute in liberation. The uneven cobblestones beneath Briar's feet, damp and worn, felt cold against her skin, yet a warmth flared in her chest as the flickering glow of torches illuminated the gathering crowd. The air, thick with the earthy scent of damp stone and faint wood smoke, swirled around her, mingling with the electric tension of anxious breaths. She inhaled deeply, tasting the metallic tang of fear and hope, reminders of her fight for every soul daring to dream of freedom. Briar's voice rose above the cacophony of murmurs, slicing through the charged air, thick with skepticism. "Remember the stories of those we've lost, the lives forever changed by this medicine we're fighting for." She stepped forward, gripping the rough stone pedestal for support. The crowd shifted uneasily, faces illuminated by flickering torchlight, revealing a spectrum of emotions, some hardened with anger, others softened by a glimmer of hope. In the distance, the rustling of banners echoed like whispers of dissent. But Briar pressed on, fidgeting with her hands, sharing the story of her sister, lost to the very illness they sought to battle. The cool evening breeze brushed against her skin, mingling with the warmth radiating from the torches. The soft crackle of firewood and distant shouts from those who disagreed filled the gaps in her speech, each sound a reminder of the stakes at hand. The statues, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama, loomed closer, their dark eyes watching her every move as if waiting for her to falter. But she stood firm, the rough texture of the cobblestones grounding her. "It's not just about the medicine, it's about our right to stand up and fight for what we believe in," she implored, her voice rising to a near crescendo, igniting a flame of resistance among those willing to listen. Uncertainty rippled through the crowd, a few heads nodding slowly, as if awakening from a deep slumber. "We cannot let fear silence us." Her chest tightened as she locked eyes with a woman at the front, her jaw clenched in anger. But in that moment, Briar caught a slight hesitance in the woman's expression, a flicker of understanding. She reached out, her voice softening. "I stand before you, not just as a speaker, but as someone who has lost so much. We are in this together, and together we can rise." As dusk deepened and the air chilled, she pressed on, warmth igniting her words. "Together we can shape our own destiny," she declared. The murmurs coiled around the towering statues like smoke, thick with apprehension and doubt. Briar stood at the edge of the crowd, her breath steadying into a calm rhythm as she faced the sea of faces, some twisted in scorn, others uncertain. Shadows stretched across the cobblestones, dark as the doubts gnawing at her. The dim light of dusk draped the square, and the scent of damp earth mingled with the faint smoke of torches, a reminder of the fire she hoped to ignite. She had swayed some, yes, but the battle for free speech and the necessity of the medicine loomed like the statues above her, silent, imposing, and steeped in a history that echoed through the ages. This was not just a plea for understanding, it was a stand against a tide of fear, a call for compassion in a world that had forgotten how to listen. Briar stepped forward, her voice slicing through the thick tension. "This medicine is more than just a remedy, it's a chance for survival. My brother, he would still be here if only we'd had access to it sooner." The words poured out, each syllable heavy with the memory of loss. Faces turned, some frowning, others curious. She met their gazes, willing them to see the truth behind her plea. "I stand here not for my sake, but for every voice that fear has tried to silence. We can't allow fear to control us. If we do, we're already defeated." Her hands trembled, grounding her against the rising tide of doubt. A man in the front shouted, his voice a sharp blade cutting through the air. "And what do you gain from this? Who benefits from your so-called freedom?" Briar's breath hitched. "It's not about me, it's about us." She scanned the crowd, finding pockets of agreement. A community that cannot speak is a community that withers. We cannot allow fear to dictate our choices. If we do, we're already lost. Her heart raced, and she searched for allies in the murmur of dissent. A woman stepped forward, her face etched with uncertainty. "But what if it doesn't work? What if it's just a promise of hope?" Briar pressed her hand against her chest. "What if it does?
We can't know unless we try. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, a wavering light against the encroaching darkness. Briar pressed on, her voice rising. We owe it to those we've lost to fight for those still here. To believe in the possibility of healing, even when it feels impossible. If we unite, we can make a difference. The support filled her with renewed determination, and she pushed forward into the heart of the gathering. The tension shifted, a current of energy sparking in the air. Some began to nod, others murmured their agreement. We cannot allow fear to win this time, she declared, her voice ringing through the square.